Well, for more on Fidel's legacy and what the future holds for Cuba, I'm joined by Piero Gleijeses. He's a professor at Johns Hopkins University. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, let's start by looking at some of the global reaction we've seen to Fidel Castro's death. We definitely saw more positive sentiments from African leaders. What stands out to you as Fidel Castro's defining moments with the African continent?
1975, when the Cuban troops stopped the invasion of Angola by South Africa and pushed the South Africans back. Then, between 1976 and 1988, the Cuban troops defended Angola from a possible South African attack. Even the CIA acknowledged that the Cuban troops were indispensable to assure the independence of Angola. And in 1988, the Cuban troops gained the upper hand over the South African troops in southern Angola and forced South Africa to bow to the demands of Cuba, right, which were the free elections in Namibia and to stop helping Jonas Savimbi, who was leading an insurrection in Angola, right, and who was well defined by the British ambassador in Luanda as a monster.
Now, a lot of people are wondering, why did Fidel take such an interest in the African continent? We saw, as you mentioned, a lot of cooperation when it comes to military aid. Why did we see that?
Well, initially there were two dimensions. One, which was self-defense. The United States was refusing any modus vivendi with Cuba, and so Cuba responded by attacking, if you want, by supporting armed struggle in Latin America and in Africa to gain friends and weaken American imperialism. But there was a second reason that CIA reports and the State Department intelligence report stressed throughout, which was what they called the revolutionary idealism of Fidel Castro, the belief that Cuba, people, had the right to help other people.
Right.
And this trumped revolutionary idealism, trumped any other consideration in 1975, when you have the South African invasion of Angola.
And speaking of Cubans helping people, some analysts actually consider Cuba's health expertise to be their most valuable export. So what about the role of Cuban healthcare and aid to Africa in that? What's the significance of that?
As you yourself said, I think, during the Cold War, Cuba sent 30,000 aid workers to Africa, and the flag bearers of Cuban humanitarian assistance were doctors, teachers, and construction workers. And to give you an example, take the town of Benguela, important town of Angola, 1987, 1988, 300,000 people. There were two Angolan doctors. One was the head of the hospital. Then there was a small Soviet medical mission, 4 doctors. And then there was a Cuban medical mission of 25 people, and of these, 12 were doctors.
Right. So clearly playing a very important role there.
An extremely important role.
Now, one thing I do want to get to is the economic ties between Cuba and Africa under Fidel versus under Raul. How do they compare? And then with Raul stepping down in 2018, what do relations do going forward?
It will depend. You know, people are not very grateful. If you take a country like Angola, which is a very rich country, Angola has a tendency to forget its debt of gratitude with Cuba and to try to court the United States. Then at the moment there are some good contracts in which Cubans experts go to Angola, etc., etc. But you know, it's based on on commercial considerations. The one thing which I think you already mentioned is that Cuba is still sending aid workers. For instance, I was in South Africa last week. In South Africa, you have 400 Cuban doctors.
Right.
They cost much less than American doctors or European doctors, and they are as good, if not better.
Well, definitely something we'll have to watch and see what happens when Raul steps down in 2018. Thank you so much for your insights, Piero Gleijeses, a professor at Johns Hopkins University. Thank you so much.